The King versus the Claw, aka LeBron James versus Kawhi Leonard. Those names alone are going to generate one of my more polarizing comment sections. But go crazy. Feel free to tell me who you think is better, but for the time being, before you even do that, watch this video because it could convince you otherwise. Because for those who have been watching my channel, you know I recently made a video where I talked about who is the best player in the NBA, and obviously I talked about the cases for both players because they are in that conversation. And with both of them playing in the city of LA, one could argue this has been somewhat of a rivalry, but it hasn't really been a rivalry, if you know what I'm saying. We've still yet to get that Clippers versus Lakers matchup. Yes, I know it's late, it's about 3 years, a little bit too late to be specific, but it's still something that I am looking forward to, and I hope we get it eventually. But in the meantime, we can settle for debates like this because this is a very interesting debate that you could approach from a multitude of different ways. But as for those who have been watching my versus videos, you know how this goes. We're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of LeBron, do the same for Kawhi, and then at the end I'm going to give my final verdict on who is the better player. So you guys sit back and relax as we kick things off with King James himself, LeBron James.
Shoot 38% from downtown. Here comes LBJ! Look out!
Oh, the crowd on their feet. That's what they came to see. If nothing else happens, they're happy now.
What can I say about LeBron that isn't already known? This is one of the greatest players of all time and is in the conversation with Michael Jordan for the greatest player in the history of basketball. But for the purposes of this video, I want you to put all of those stuff to the side because we're not talking about LeBron James for his career. We're not talking about LeBron James at his peak in Miami. We're talking about LeBron James at 36 years old, turning 37 in December, right now playing for the Los Angeles Lakers. Because no matter how you feel about LeBron James' career in its totality, the days of LeBron just towering over the NBA as its best player are long gone. It's not to say that he's not in that conversation or you're stupid for thinking that he is currently the best, but it's not as clear cut and dry as it used to be. And comparing him to Kawhi Leonard, please, let's not just go in the comment section and act like Kawhi's not in this conversation, because he very much indeed is. And as a side note, I'm not going to give LeBron even more props just because he's 36 years old and he's in this conversation. That's impressive, but that's just a very lazy and just straight up biased way of looking at why LeBron is the best player. But now that we have cleared that up, let's now transition into LeBron James as a player. Individually, when you're talking about the best players in the league, there's one thing that really separates LeBron from a lot of others, and it's the strengths in his game being in multiple aspects of basketball. As it really just boils down to the fact that LeBron is a very well-rounded player. And I hate to use that very simplistic argument, but it's just very true about a guy like LeBron James. As a playmaker, he's one of the league's best, not only today, but in NBA history. This is a guy that has been able to be one of the best passers in basketball essentially ever since he entered the league, and even right now, going on to 37 years old, he's coming off of a season the year prior to the past one where he led the league in assists. And ever since he's gone to the Lakers, once he got Anthony Davis, he took on the role of being a point guard, and he has excelled and thrived in that playmaking role at an all-time level. And then you move on to what he does as a scorer, and he obviously has holes in his game there. I'll touch on that in a bit. But as it pertains to what he excels at, he is a great finisher at the rim, even at this stage in his career. He may not be able to impose himself like he did in his Miami Heat days, but don't mistake that for a sharp decline. He's still a very great finisher at the rim. And combine that with this very streaky jump shooting, and you have one of the best scorers in the league today. And another thing that adds to LeBron James as a player is his impact on both sides of the ball. We addressed what he does as a scorer. He's one of the best in the league. As a playmaker, he's one of the best of all time. But as a defender at this point in his career, I think he's somewhat underrated. As if you watch what LeBron James was doing this past season, yes, he was not the defender he used to be in Miami, but the man was still capable of playing all NBA defense. His lateral quickness is amazing. He's a borderline elite help defender, and with his versatility on that side of the ball, he can really guard 1 through 4 and even some small ball 5s. Obviously, the energy and effort is not always there on a consistent basis, but still, when he's trying, he's one of the league's best defenders. And as far as performances go, LeBron is still one of the best performers in the postseason. And I know last year he did have a really tough playoffs, but I chalk a lot of that up to injuries, and the Lakers, they really were just no good overall, and a hobbled LeBron James without Anthony Davis was not going to fix that situation much. But as we've seen throughout LeBron's career, hell, just the previous season in the bubble, we've seen LeBron play at all-time levels every year in the playoffs, establishing himself and putting himself in the conversation as arguably the GOAT playoff performer. And when you bundle all of that up, it's no surprise why LeBron is in the conversation still at this late age for being the best player in the world. But when you look at the weaknesses in LeBron's game, you start to realize maybe he is a little bit more human than you think. As a scorer, despite being elite as far as production goes, there are still a lot of flaws in his game. His mid-range shot is not that good whatsoever, I would say. Even at this point in his career, he's still just not a good mid-range shooter. There are a lot of times where teams just go under his screens and he just can't take advantage of easy mid-range pull-up opportunities, and it sucks because LeBron, those should be gimmies at this point in your career. And as a three-point shooter, though he can make them, he's not a consistent three-point shooter. I would just say he's a streaky one. He has nights where he's hitting them and he looks like Steph Curry pulling up from the logo, but then there are nights where LeBron is missing from three. You know, he wipes his hand in his shirt, you know, he blows his hands, and he acts like it's just a bad shot. No, he's just not a consistent three-point shooter, bruh. And that's okay, but then you move on to the free throws, bro. The free throws, my goodness, easily the worst part in LeBron's game. And if you watch my channel, you know I have a huge pet peeve when it comes to free throws, especially for superstar players. You're being paid millions of American dollars and you can't knock down a free throw. It is called a free throw for a reason. Free, keyword free. And I love Bron, but man, that shit really be pissing me off sometimes, because you could tell at the end of games he really settles for some tough three-point shots or a mid-range jumper because of the fact that he doesn't want to get to the paint, get fouled, and potentially lose the game off of a gimme free throw. But aside from the weaknesses as a scorer, when you look at the durability on LeBron's body, especially over the last couple of seasons, it's been a little bit in question. His first year in LA, he had the groin injury. The second year, the bubble came, and you could argue that layoff helped LeBron James stay healthy. And just this past year, he suffers a freak ankle injury where Solomon Hill rolls on his ankle. And to be fair, that was more of a freak injury, but injuries are injuries nonetheless, and healing time after them definitely is affected by your age. LeBron James is getting up there, and injuries are not something that he can just shove aside like that. Father Time is undefeated, and the best ability is availability. And LeBron James' availability, it may not be at Kobe Achilles level, but it's definitely starting to leak in just a little bit. But to be fair to LeBron, he is in very peak condition. I'm sure he's used this extra break in the offseason after being sent home earlier than a lot of people expected, and early for his career standards. I'm sure he's used this time to get in the lab Goku style and just train for next season. So as far as King James is concerned, he definitely has his weaknesses at the free throw line, the mid-range shooting, but as far as what he's doing on the court, this is a guy that's still an elite playmaker, still a great finisher at the rim. When he's on defensively, which is more times than not, especially after adding Anthony Davis, he's one of the league's best. And when you wrap all that up, you have LeBron fucking James. So it shouldn't come as any surprise why LeBron is considered the best player even at this stage in his career. Whether you agree with it or not, LeBron is still playing at an all-time level. But then you move on to a guy like Kawhi Leonard, and man, this guy definitely has a case for why he's better than LeBron.
Hardaway Jr. Oh, another steal by Kawhi, his fourth. Back the other way. Oh, my goodness! Hello, nasty!
Well, oh Kawhi, the Claw, that cyborg ass nigga. When you talk about those stone-blooded killers with no emotion, you're talking about Kawhi Leonard. This is a guy that, like LeBron, is one of the all-time great playoff performers, showing up series after series after series. And as a player, there isn't really that much that Kawhi Leonard can't do. As a scorer, he's evolved over the years with a very deadly mid-range shot. He's a good three-point shooter as well, can finish at the rim, score at the free throw line, and honestly, I would say he's one of the more well-rounded scorers, not only in the NBA today, today, but probably in history. It may not be as flashy as some other guys, but it still gets the job done, and he does it very efficiently, I might add. Then you move on to his ability as a defender, and obviously he's one of the greatest defenders of all time. May not be what he used to be in San Antonio, I'll definitely give you that, but when you're consistently getting up there in age, as now he's in his 30s, a decline is expected, especially if you have the load that he has now on offense as compared to the load he had back in San Antonio, where he was playing with Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and etc. You guys get my point there. But nonetheless, even right now, his defense is still at an elite level. But as far as his ball handling and playmaking is concerned, it may not be on the level of other counterparts in the top 10, but he's still a very good ball handler and has grown into a fairly decent playmaker despite having some flaws in that aspect of the game that we'll touch on in a second. So when you look at what he's able to provide on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, it's very clear and apparent that Kawhi Leonard is one of the better two-way players in all of basketball. But unfortunately, when you talk about his flaws, there are a couple of flaws that I have to mention. Like I was talking about earlier, his playmaking is decent, but it's fairly limited. He's not somebody that's going to be throwing across the court passes consistently. He's not as great as passing out of double teams as guys like Steph Curry, LeBron James, Luka Doncic, Jokic, you know, guys that are around his tier of players. As if you go back to the bubble, that was a huge weakness for Kawhi and the Clippers as a whole, as they put a lot of ball handling and playmaking responsibilities on Kawhi Leonard, and it really was their downfall. That's why when you look at a season like this year with Kawhi Leonard sharing the ball handling responsibilities a lot more with Paul George, it really changed the dynamic of the entire Clippers offense and took them to another level. And then you combine that with durability concerns, especially coming off of a season like this where it ended with a partial ACL tear. That is something that you have to consider, especially with a guy entering his early 30s and has been load managing for a majority of his career. But the claw is still in effect in the NBA, easily a top 5 player, and if you disagree with that, please put down the crack pipe because it is messing with your brain for real. But now that brings us to the final verdict between Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James. Who is indeed the better player? And this is tough, like my Paul George versus Jason Tatum video, my Luka versus Harden video. I will say it again. These guys are very close in the all-time rankings, so do not be offended if I pick either or. But as far as my answer, I'm gonna go with King James, LeBron. Because LeBron, look, he may not be the defender consistently that Kawhi Leonard is, and sure, his productivity has slipped in recent years, but he's still very capable of playing defense at an elite level. He was doing that just this season, and when you throw in his playmaking ability, that's really what just puts it over the top for me, because he's still a very capable scorer, has weaknesses in his scoring, and yes, I know Kawhi specializes in a lot of those weaknesses, but the gap as a playmaker between those two, I believe, is more than the gap as a defender and a scorer, and that's why I give the edge to LeBron James. But hey, you guys are all entitled to disagree. That's why the comment section is there. Feel free to let me know your opinions down below. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Thank you to all of the love and support that you guys have shown the channel, especially over the last month. I appreciate all of it. This is your boy Young Mustard signing out. Y'all stay safe and have a blessed day. Peace.